It gives me great personal pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker. On September 23rd, 2014, the Honourable Elizabeth Dowdeswell was invested as Ontario's 29th Lieutenant Governor. Her Honour's public service career has spanned provincial, federal, and international borders. It has included senior executive positions in the Saskatchewan Public Service and with Environment and Climate Change Canada, where she worked on Great Lakes water quality and water quantity issues, before moving on to become the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program and Under Secretary General of the United Nations headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya. While with Environment and Climate Change Canada, Her Honour gave me my start working on Great Lakes issues, assigning me to work alongside her on the International Joint Commission's Great Lakes Water Levels Reference Study Board. She has been a longtime friend and mentor and inspiration. And so it is with, again, great pleasure that I introduce Her Honour, the Honourable Elizabeth Dowdeswell.
Thank you, Mike. Chief Laforme, Your Worship, elected representatives, environmental advocates, and quite frankly, everybody who cares about the future of the Great Lakes. Good morning. May I first acknowledge Toronto as a sacred gathering place for many Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. I recognize the ancient and enduring history of First Nations and Métis people in Ontario, and this morning I want to pay particular respect to the Mississaugas of the New Credit. I'm not only honored to have been asked to give opening remarks this morning for this Great Lakes Public Forum 2016, but I'm excited to do so. It's been wonderful to see some people from my past and from my present, and I look forward very much to hopefully encouraging you on the path that you've begun. I thank Environment and Climate Change Canada for committing to this important and timely dialogue, and of course to our counterparts at US EPA. As Mike suggested, for me this is a very familiar event, bringing back so many memories of challenging and productive years when the Great Lakes was actually the focus of my working life. But as well today, it's a very special event because it's an opportunity to refocus and to celebrate, certainly as we in Canada prepare to and reflect on 150 years as a nation. No better time for celebration. Before going any further, I thought perhaps it would be useful to answer a question that may be on the minds of many of our American friends here, and that's, what on earth is a lieutenant governor? The straightforward answer lies in the fact that Canada is a constitutional monarchy with the Queen as head of state, and the lieutenant governor is the Queen's representative in Ontario. So my role includes various constitutional duties, reading the speech from the throne, granting royal assent, swearing in the Premier and members of Cabinet, and formally approving very many of the government decisions. But that aside, the real privilege of this position is the opportunity to meet Ontarians, to celebrate with them all of those people and events in which they take such pride, and to understand better what their actual challenges are. So I travel throughout this great province, meeting as many people as possible where they live, work, and play. I listen to and share what they have to say, and in many ways I like to call myself the province's chief storyteller. Now, for someone who has spent a life in the public policy world, the most intriguing thing about the role is the opportunity that I have to convene people, to shine a light on important societal issues in a way that transcends both politics and time. I must be rigorously apolitical and non-prescriptive, but I can help to create awareness, and raise questions with others to take action. The story I want to tell this morning is really a story stretching back more than 14,000 years. It's the story of the Great Lakes. These inland seas have played a central role in the life of this province, certainly. They're extraordinary and epic. The rivers and streams that flow into them cover almost a third of our continent. They sustain the livelihoods and well-being of nearly 40 million people.
It's not a sign of anything.
I was going to say. The Anishinaabe people say that water is the lifeblood of Mother Earth. It follows then that the Great Lakes are certainly the heart and arteries of North America. The Great Lakes are a 3,700-kilometer pathway into the heart of our continent. Our villages, towns, and cities were established on their shores, first by Indigenous peoples, and then by European settlers and those that followed them. And look what these lakes have enabled: industries, agriculture, exports. Today, the Great Lakes region generates an estimated $6 trillion in economic activity every year. The diversity of our encounters with the Great Lakes also reflects the diversity of the people living on the shores. They were once vital entrants to both agricultural and industrial heartlands. They've now become the hub of innovation, the home to many universities, colleges, and research institutes, and of course, as always, a focus for recreation. But as will be drawn out in greater detail over the coming days of this conference, the lake's long-term sustainability rests, as it has always rested, on balancing the needs of commerce, industry, the environment, recreation, and culture. These lakes are also great because of their international dimension. Their shared majesty has encouraged an unprecedented amount of cooperation between the two nations that inhabit their shores. Actually, once a battle line in the War of 1812, these Great Lakes are now a living laboratory for environmental stewardship. Both Canada and the United States and their neighboring states and provinces have worked together for decades to protect and restore the integrity of the waters of the Great Lakes. I personally think we'd be hard-pressed to find any other example of long-standing and effective collaboration between nations, and so I'm delighted to particularly welcome our American colleagues with us here today. On the matter of cross-border collaboration, I can speak with some knowledge and experience, as Mike has suggested. In times past, I had the good fortune to manage the team that identified the polluted areas of concern in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, developed the initial remedial action plans, served as the Canadian chair of the Great Lakes Water Quality Board, and co-chaired at least one IJC reference on fluctuating water levels. Throughout, I was, of course, very much a participant in enabling citizen engagement through events such as the forerunner to this Great Lakes Public Forum. And I should say along the way, I learned an awful lot about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we have a lot of shared experiences that make me feel very much at home today. And although I have to be apolitical and non-prescriptive, perhaps I can make just a few observations about the conversations that I hope you'll be having during the next few days. The context in which you'll be having these conversations is both local and global. Water is certainly a constant theme for Canadians. The focus of our attention may range from the specter of future conflicts over scarce supplies of water to alarm about the quality and safety of local drinking water. From the degradation of freshwater ecosystems and the loss of habitat to both hopes and uncertainties about how we actually apply market mechanisms and private sector participation in the water sector. And of course, with globalization and liberalized trade, we come face to face with potential environmental consequences, such as the presence of invasive or alien species in boundary waters, and industrial-style pollution that's associated with intensive agriculture. And even less well-defined are potential impacts of structural changes to the economy, changing patterns of urbanization and utility sector deregulation. And of course, any analysis of the current state of geopolitics and economic development reveals a pervasive sense of insecurity about future energy supply and global climate disruption. How to design the transition to a carbon-constrained world is one of the most vexing conundrums facing us all. So those are all relevant and significant topics for conversation that I'm hoping you'll touch on in some way during the next 2 days. But might I further suggest that you actually frame those conversations, and in that framing that you specifically take into account 2 considerations. First, the state of our science, state of our understanding and technological development, because science is, after all, the very basis from which we operate. And secondly, what are the most effective governance models and management approaches? Better scientific understanding has allowed us to understand the synergistic effects of pollutants, threats to children's health from lead, and threats to hormonal systems from chemicals. But there are some core systemic questions about science that remain. For example, how can our scientific models, including traditional indigenous knowledge, better incorporate the dynamism, the dynamic interactions between nature and society? What determines vulnerability and resilience? How can we actually value nature's environmental services? How do evolving technologies and a menu of choices actually contribute to our understanding of risk and ultimately our design of norms, standards, and obligations to mitigate those risks? Lots of scientific questions remain. Notwithstanding the far-sighted shared management approaches taken by Canada and the US, provinces, states, and cities, constant attention to governance and management is essential in such a complex, fast-paced, uncertain, and interconnected world. It is worth asking questions like, how do we actually bring fresh and innovative perspectives to our entrenched modes of thinking? How do we make sure that we have a capacity for foresight? How do we design agility and responsiveness into our often paralyzed midlife crisis institutional structures? How do we replace ecologically empty economic models? How do we bring about attitudinal and behavioral change, both in individuals and in institutions? And in countries with multiple centers of power, how do we actually develop common objectives and coherence rather than fragmentation? And perhaps of most significance, how do we create opportunities for genuine citizen engagement? After all, you are here to provide input in setting priorities for future research and action. You're here to help evaluate the trade-offs that must be made among competing objectives. And you're here to hold decision makers accountable. Years ago, I learned some very valuable lessons from work that I was privileged to be a part of on the question of what Canada was going to do with its high-level nuclear waste. We were asked to propose a system that had to meet rigorous standards of safety and security for periods longer than recorded history. Just a little bit humbling. But during our study, we were very often asked, why is it necessary to involve non-experts, ordinary people? Why should we even consider ethical and social aspects in our deliberation? Surely what we expect and what we seek is the best technical response. Well, there are several answers to that question, but in its simplest form, the answer, of course, is that the public has a right to be engaged in discussion about matters that will affect their lives fundamentally. Central to the issue of waste management is risk, and while scientists and specialists can articulate the nature of risk and ways in which that risk might be mitigated, it's really society that's going to ultimately decide what risks they are prepared to accept. And so values and deeply held beliefs matter a great deal. Furthermore, as several authors have noted in recent years, what qualifies as intellectual authority in contemporary societies, in other words, who and what to believe, is changing rather fundamentally. People today are much less prepared to defer to experts. You've heard the phrases, the wisdom of crowds and the decline of deference, for example. But engaging citizens is not simply a matter of rights. It's actually about making better decisions. Because people who are affected by policies bring special insights and on-the-ground knowledge to the table. And astute decision makers in both public and private sectors are very wise to recognize this. Policies and decisions that are developed in an environment of trust and confidence are much more likely to draw public consensus. Participants who feel integral to a process will be motivated to help sustain its outcome. And I believe that the organizers of this forum understand that in a democratic society, the inclusiveness and integrity of a process by which decisions are taken will be central to successful outcomes. Only a process that considers diverse views and seeks out multiple perspectives in genuine and transparent dialogue will be considered worthy of protecting the public interest in the end. And finally, I can't help but ask you to think a little bit about the title of this forum, Celebrate Our Great Lakes. Because this is not just a conference about doing the science and fixing the problems. Because the meaning of the Great Lakes has to be about much more than the sum of their challenges or a series of facts about size and how much fresh water they hold. The Great Lakes, by their size and their history, speak to the essential human need to connect with something bigger than ourselves. They encourage a deep emotional and spiritual commitment in people. Listen to the words of one of my friends, the Canadian underwater explorer, doctor and author Dr. Joe McGinnis, who wrote recently, and I quote, "The Great Lakes are not repeated anywhere. They are not comparable to anything. Perfect in their primordial place, they transcend our understanding of the world." I witnessed this magical connection when visitors to the Lieutenant Governor's suite responded this past year to an exhibition that we curated of contemporary art. It was entitled Identity, Art Inspired by the Great Lakes. And absolutely everybody had a Great Lakes story to tell. The exhibition survives online, so go to www.lgontario.ca and click Visit and enjoy. The response I received to the exhibition is one of the things that leads me to believe that there is a reawakening in Ontario, a desire to honor the role that the Great Lakes play in our very identity as a province, to celebrate their majesty and meaning, and to ensure that they are cherished, protected, and nurtured. On Thursday, you will hear much more, because you will hear about greatness, the Great Lakes Project. If one word can sum up what the Great Lakes can be in the lives of tens of millions who live on its shore, it is the word greatness. And I'm not able to spill the beans and tell you any more about the project. I leave you all waiting with eager anticipation, but it is something that we can all aspire to. And I would ask that between now and Thursday, what you do is to think bold and ambitious thoughts. As Her Majesty the Queen's representative in the province of Ontario, I want to thank you most warmly for this reception this morning. I wish you a most productive conference. This is a moment for celebration, but it's also a moment for serious thought about our future. And you are so very privileged to be in this room with those who are sitting with you to have this important conversation. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.